Tolkien's Silmaril and Mithril lore underwent a significant change in the Rings of Power, all because some Lord of the Rings tales are off-limits to Amazon. This is now changing. Were the Rings of Power's Mithril plot a crucial part of Sauron's ring plans? Did the Rings of Power Mithril retcon fix the show's Silmaril problems? Stay tuned to find out all the important unanswered questions we need answered. First up, were the Rings of Power's Mithril plot a crucial part of Sauron's ring plans? According to the Silmarillion, which Amazon does not own the rights to, Sauron approaches the elves as Annatar, the giver of gifts, a fair figure. In this guise, he teaches ring-making skills to the elves, allowing them to make powerful rings. The 3 elven rings mentioned in the ring poem were made by Celebrimbor in secret, outside of Sauron's control, even if they were still unwittingly tied to his one ring. The elven smiths were tricked into producing a ton of rings. The 3 elven rings, the 7 dwarven rings, and the 9 rings of men became subject to Sauron's will when he placed the one ring on his finger. Parts of this plan were already in motion, as Celebrimbor is already constructing powerful furnaces at Eregion, wanting to create something with actual power. Elrond is unwittingly drawn into the plot when they have him try to form a partnership with the dwarves to build the towers. Still, it's likely Sauron, as Annatar had already approached Celeborn. It's even possible that Sauron is the one who stoked the elves' fear of fading and their hopes with the idea to use the dwarves' mithril to restore the light of Eldar. Next up, have the elven rings solved Gil-galad and Celebrimbor's worry about elf mortality? Conveniently, the elven rings of power may offer a different solution to the same problem while requiring significantly less mithril than the elves' original plan, which was to obtain a significant quantity of mithril and use it to re-envelope every elf in Middle-earth in the light of the trees. The Silmarillion states that those who had them in their keeping could ward off the decays of time and postpone the weariness of the world, even though we know very little about the 3 elven power rings, Narya, Nenya, and Vilya, at least in comparison to what we know about the One Ring. The fact that these rings' powers expressly offer the same solution cannot be overlooked. The elves of the Rings of Power are looking for the dwarven mithril. The Lord of the Rings, Episode 7, The Eye, sees King Durin forbidding Prince Durin from mining for mithril. Celeborn and Gil-galad are unlikely to accept their eventual mortality because they can't use the mithril, so the elves came up with new strategies to ward off the decay of time. Sauron appears as Annatar, the giver of gifts, to show them how to create powerful rings that will ease all their fears. Next off, could Elrond's mithril be used to make Galadriel's elven ring of power? It's interesting to note that while Narya, a gold ring with a red stone, is handed to the elf lord Círdan, who later gives it to Gandalf, and Vilya, a gold ring studded with a blue sapphire, is eventually worn by Elrond, Nenya is made of mithril. Given that all 3 rounds can prevent aging, it is clear that this property is common to Nenya's mithril. However, the elves created these rings to prevent their race's aging, using the same dwarven metal that Celeborn and Gil-galad intended to use for the same purpose raises more questions than answers. The fact that the program may have already disclosed the mithril that went into Nenya's creation increases the ring's significance. King Durin forbade Prince Durin from mining any more mithril, or give any of it to the elves. Although we know that both events will occur in the future, it appears that they will only be resolved in time to ease the elves' current problems. Fortunately, Elrond already has a chunk of mithril that contains more than enough of the metal to create a ring. Thus, the elves won't depend on the dwarves to give any mithril for the making of Nenya. Elrond is shown carrying the piece of mithril Durin initially handed him in a drawn-out scene after being expelled from Khazad-dûm by the king. Next, did Vilya and Nenya ever fulfill the elves' desires? Elrond and Galadriel's rings, Vilya and Nenya, ultimately satisfy the wishes of the elves by protecting both their homes, Rivendell and Lothlorien. According to the Silmarillion, thus it was that in 2 domains the bliss and beauty of the elves remained undiminished, while that age endured, in Imlardis and in Lothlorien, where the trees bore flowers of gold and no orc or evil thing dared ever come. The development of the elven rings was a part of a plan devised by Sauron that brought even more evil into the world. Thus, even if their strength finally preserved, the elves' immortality as desired, the rings Rings of Power may have some complex thematic issues for viewers to consider in the upcoming seasons. It's difficult to predict how this plot will end, because the idea that Mithril contains the light of the Silmarils and might give the elves a healing light is a brand new lore that appears only in the Rings of Power. Still, the reason for finally making the Elven Rings has been clearly stated. With the season finale quickly coming, we should expect significant developments in Sauron's ring plot, and perhaps even learn whether Elrond's tiny mithril fragment is connected to Nenya's creation. Next off, why can the Rings of Power use all of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings canon? On the other hand, Rings of Power Silmaril retcon has proved its biggest Lord of the Rings canon problem. The recent retcon of the Rings of Power is the most considerable canon restraint for the show shown by the Lord of the Rings lore of J.R.R. Tolkien. Even while the front has adhered mainly to Tolkien's interpretation of events, there are several Lord of the Rings storylines that the Rings of Power writers aren't allowed to include in the series. Some Tolkien fans may be disappointed by these inconsistencies or omissions. Still, they also show how faithfully the show has been to the author. Due to circumstances like Marvel Studios, where the rights to some of the characters were spread out to studios such as the X-Men to 20th Century Fox and Spider-Man to Sony, the complex world of movie and TV rights to various properties has gained a lot of attention in recent years, before its acquisition by Disney. The situation is a little more straightforward regarding J.R.R. Tolkien's works, even though the way the material's rights are handled is a little different. Next up, are the Rings of Power toying with one of Tolkien's biggest Lord of the Rings stories? While the darkening of Valinor is shown in the prologue of the Rings of Power's first episode as the catalyst for the elves' departure from their homeland after the trees lost their light to fight Morgoth in Middle-earth, it hides the elves' true intentions. The Silmarils, 3 jewels containing the holy light of the 2 trees, are the work of Fëanor, a powerful elf and expert gemcrafter. The Silmarils were taken by Morgoth when he devastated the trees. Most of the elves then followed him to Middle-earth, as Fëanor was on a crazy quest for vengeance. The events surrounding Fëanor's Silmarils are much more detailed in the Silmarillion. A show centered on that lore section would be particularly alluring because of how central it is to the rest of the Lord of the Rings saga, and because it has its epic mythology. The Silmarils, the sole reason many of the elves are in Middle-earth in the first place, are sadly only given hazy allusions or cursory remarks in the Rings of Power, since the Amazon show doesn't own the rights to them. Next off, did the Rings of Power mithril retcon fix the show's Silmaril problem? In the Silmarillion, Fëanor's search for the Silmarils caused his Noldor elves to engage in combat with other elves, the kinslaying, which led Mandos, one of the Valar, to proclaim the doom of the Noldor, angelic beings. The doom of the Noldor exiled the people of Fëanor from Valinor and predicted that as long as they stayed in Middle-earth, they would endure tremendous misery and lose power. It appears like the Rings of Power came up with a clever way to get around the significant plot development. The show has shown that plants and animals are becoming sick as darkness spreads throughout Middle-earth. Now Gil-galad, the ruler of the Noldor, claims that the elves are now dying, symbolizing a variation of the doom of Mandos. Since they don't have the rights to all of Tolkien's works, changes to the Lord of the Rings canon are a fact of the Rings of Power's adaptation. However, the way the show has skirted the Silmarils and now literally transferred their light into mithril is a deft storytelling move that allows the display to hew closer to the story and spirit of Tolkien's works. The Rings of Power is a great series to sink your teeth in, and with its plot twists and clues, it's fun to understand its concept. Have you watched The Rings of Power? Who's your favorite character from the series? Make sure to let us know your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching.